Okay, so in this video we're going to look at creating a element on a page and actually inspecting this element in terms of the properties and the methods that are available on it. And this basically comes into the fact that we can manipulate items on a page like markup, so we can actually do stuff with these DOM elements. Now DOM is the document object model, and it basically just gives us a variety of things that we can do with things on a page. It's its own API, so we can do things within JavaScript that allow us to access, for example, things like the text within elements. We can remove and add elements. In this video, we're specifically going to be focusing on just an introduction to how we can target a specific element and then do things like get the text from it, set the text within it, remove the method. We'll check if an element has a specific attribute and actually getting the attribute values. So we'll look at some general things that you might commonly come across, and then from there on you can go ahead and explore the rest of the methods and properties that different DOM elements have available for them. So we're going to go in this video create a link. So hopefully you're familiar with HTML, and I'm just going to say I'm a link, and I'm going to set an href here to hash just because it's not going to go anywhere. In fact, we could maybe set it to something like google.co.uk or google.com. So I'm also going to give this an ID of link, and I'm going to go ahead and just open up some script tags down here. I'm not going to do this in an external file because we want to sort of see what we're doing here at the same time, so don't worry too much if you're just practicing. I'm going to go ahead and create a global variable called link. In fact, we can call this element, I guess, and I'm going to set this to, now there's a function in JavaScript called get element by ID, and that's in camel case, so you've got a small g, capital E, capital B, and a capital I with a small d, and that takes a parameter which is the name of the ID that you've given a specific element. Now remember, IDs should be unique within your markup, so you should never have more than one element with the same ID. There are different ways to select elements on a page, so like a query selector or query selector all, but we'll take a look at them in next video, so don't worry too much about that yet. We're just selecting it by ID, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to mess around with this element within the console. So in this case, you probably already guessed, the ID of this element is link, and we're just going to say get element by ID link. So that will select this element, and it will give us the properties and methods that are attached to it as well. So that's things like methods to set the inner text, the property which contains the inner text, remove method to actually remove the element from the page, etc. So we'll take a look at them and how we interact with them in a moment. So we've now got this global variable called element. We can go ahead and we can start to play around with this. Let's go ahead and open the browser first of all and just take a look at this. Okay. Oh, sorry. We do have this function get element ID, but it's part of the document object. So if we take a look at our browser, I suppose we can sort of delve into this a little bit. If I type document, you can see that this document here has all of the markup associated with it, but this also has methods like get element ID, and so really what we're dealing with here is a method on this document object. So this is basically the DOM that we can start to use methods from. So now that we've got the link here, what we can do is we can start to say element, and that will give you the actual markup back from the element so we can see what we're working with. But also if we go ahead and type element dot, you can see that we've got a large list of different properties and methods that we can do things with here. So there's a long list of lots of different things that we can do, and it's good if you're learning to go ahead and play around with different things and see what they do, see what they return, and then go ahead and look them up in Mozilla Developer Network or something, which gives you quite good information on all of these. But now let's go ahead and just run through the short list of things that we want to look at and things that we want to do. So for example, let's just say that on a page I want to go ahead and get the contents of an element. So I have an element on a page, whether that be a div, a paragraph, a link, a strong tag. It could be anything. Any element that can contain text, we can use the text property on. So it just looks like that text. When I hit enter, it returns the string value of the content that's within it. And again, we can do things like chain on different methods or properties that are inherited here, because remember, a string is an object, so we can use things like length on it. So we can see that we get 10 characters back there. So we can do all of this even though we're accessing it from an element on a page. So we've got the text I'm a link, and then we can use the length property on that. So that's just a way we can do that. But let's take a look at a method now that allows us to actually set inner text, and that is inner HTML and inner text. Now they both do relatively the same thing, but there are subtle differences. The fact that text is just plain text and markup allows actual markup to be implemented within the element is the fundamental difference. So for example, inner text, I'm going to go ahead and provide a property here and just say click me, for example. Oops, okay, sorry. This is a property, so not a method. So what we're going to do here is actually assign this value like this. So this is the property, which is the inner text, and we're going to say equals click. So there we go, and we can do click me or something like that. So yeah, sorry about that. We've set a properties value. It does seem like it would be a method that you would pass an element to, but it's not. We'll look at the remove method in a minute. That's definitely a method. So we can also do things like the inner HTML, which if we look at, say, inner text, and I wanted to say set strong tags around this, you'll see that this will literally give me out the elements entities for the characters in this. So it doesn't actually render as HTML. But if we go ahead and use the inner HTML property to set that value, you actually see that that's now gone bold, and we can check that within here, and it says here font weight bold. So we know that we can do that just by setting this, and yeah, it's probably one of the most used things that you'll use if you need to change elements contents on a page. Now we also have the remove method, which is definitely a method. If I go ahead and call this, you can see that that's been removed from the page now. It no longer exists here, obviously until we refresh it comes back. So we can remove an element from a page, and you'll see that it returns undefined, which basically means it doesn't return a value, but don't worry about that too much. Okay, so let's go ahead and just say we wanted within JavaScript to check the link of this. Let's say we just wanted to return whatever href this has, and we know that this has the href of google.co.uk. But what happens if we want to do that with JavaScript? Well, we can go ahead and let's say we'll create another variable called link. Now I want this to be element dot get attribute, and then I want to define the attribute within here that I want to get, and that could be href, for example, and that will give me back a string value of the link that I want to do, link that I want to look at. So now that I've set a variable called link, I could do things like link.length if I wanted to, so it gives me the length of the string. So again, because it's a string value, it inherits the length property. It tells us the length of the string, so we can use everything like that. We could also then even do something like window.location, which will redirect us, and we can redirect ourselves to the link, so that works just as well. We can do things like that. So we've now seen that we can actually get an element, but what happens if we want to check if an element exists first of all? Well, we can use a property called hasAttribute. So for example, element.hasAttribute. So let's say I wanted to check if this has an attribute rel. False, it doesn't. What about if it has an attribute href? Well, that's true, it does actually have an href. So we can use that to grab back the specific values of an attribute. And this can be used for all different types of purposes. We don't need to necessarily check it, but it makes sense. We can also remove attributes as well, so we could remove the href attribute if we wanted to. Again, that's worked, it's magic, but it's returned undefined, just doesn't have a return value. And you can now see that this link is unclickable. The href has now disappeared, so we've used that to remove the attribute. So there's all different types of methods that relate around the same thing. You can see that with the attribute, we can use get attribute, has attribute, remove attribute, and this is similar for lots of other different things as well. Okay, the last thing that we're going to take a look at here is something more to the point of sort of positioning on the page, and can be used for animation, and this sort of delves into a slightly different way of working with elements, and that is the offset of an element. So this would usually relate to things like animation or positioning of a certain element on a page, but let's go and take a look at some of the offsets. So if I go ahead and type offset, you can see that we've got offset height, left, parent, top and width. We'll focus on top, left and just look at them for now. So if I say offset top, that just is a property that would return me the pixel count of the offset from the top of the page, and then if I was to choose left, that gives me the pixel value of the offset from the left. So these are obviously the only two we need, so we're looking at the X and Y axis. But what happens if I go ahead and change this? Now I'm going to go ahead and inspect this element in Chrome, and I'm going to go ahead and set the element style to have a margin left of 20 pixels. So we now see that that's moved over 20 pixels. If we go ahead and choose the offset left again, we can see that it's in fact now 28, because we've moved it 20 pixels from the left, plus the 8 that it already was, and that 8 is due to the body. So we've got a margin of 8 pixels on the body. You can see that by default the user agent style sheet styles it that way, so that makes sense now. Also, if we have elements within other elements, we'll be able to say things like the offset parent, and if you take a look at that, you can see that we've got offset parent dot offset left top. So for example, if I say offset top from the parent, that's 0, and offset left from the parent, that's 0 as well. So yeah, it makes sense to sort of delve into these things, and here you can see that this property contains other properties as well, so it's sort of nesting properties in here as well. But that's just a little introduction as to how you might look at properties and methods of a DOM element on a page. And you can see, if we just scoot back to our code, that we've got this get element ID method on the document object, which allows us to get an element by a specific ID and access all of the properties and methods. Now, my advice to you would be to go ahead and do exactly what we've done here, and just go ahead and play around with all of the different methods that you can see and the properties that you can see on the element. Now, in the next video, we're going to look at query selector and query selector all methods, which aren't supported in some older browsers, but are extremely useful and are much more useful than having to go and get an element by an ID. However, what we're also then going to look at in the video after that is actually working with event handlers. So you'll see that within your list of methods and properties on your element, you'll see things like on abort, on before copy, on before cut, on blur, more commonly on click, and these basically allow us to set event handlers for when we actually click an element or do something to an element. We're allowed to run a block of code based on that event, so they're event handlers. Now, we won't go into that now, but we will go into that in a couple of videos time.